Our final section of notes is all about biodiversity. The major objective is to discuss what makes life unique, what variety of life exists on the planet, and what are some of its causes and its impacts, its importance. So what we're looking at is biodiversity, the variety of, I just refer to it as a variety of life, to be quite honest, but a variety of specific species in an area. Remember that biodiversity is going to increase near the equator. The Amazon rainforest has very few limiting factors. So when we talk about populations, if there's few limiting factors, the population of everything is going to be likely to increase. And that increases diversity over a long period of time, for sure. About 300 tree species in 1 hectare, so that's pretty unique. Biodiversity increases with primary productivity. So the more plants and the more energy plants can get, the more links in the food chain there are, which means higher energy base. All right, so that's why we can support this diverse ecosystem. So it happens near the equator in this tropical rainforest. Importance of biodiversity with 3 major categories for its importance. Definitions are pretty straightforward. Ecological importance, so function and support services. So things like photosynthesis, water purification, those things don't happen without a wide range of biodiversity to do that. Aesthetic is the next one. So a word that may be new to you, but honestly, aesthetic is really referring to beauty, the beauty of nature. So we talk about forests are beautiful, it can be reflective, they can be helpful in meditation and prayer, and it can be nice to just go for hikes and recreational activities as well. Last one, economic. Resources are harvested from nature. We talk about medicines, lumber, all these things that we can take from nature that provide some economic benefit. So we could sell them and utilize them in some way. That would be our economic value. So these are ways biodiversity has value. A keystone species is something, without biodiversity we wouldn't have so many keystone species, but it's really important because they really help us see how critical every link in the food chain is. So a keystone species is usually a top predator that regulates populations in an ecosystem. So in this web here, without the sea otter in the Pacific Northwest, the sea urchin populations would be very poorly controlled. Other things can take energy from sea urchins, but these top predators are helping to regulate the population. Without them, the sea urchins could take over and deplete other producer resources along the way. So you just have to think about that in terms of interrelationships in the food chain. So what would happen if the sea otter went extinct? Well, then we would see, all right, well, these populations of sea urchins would skyrocket because the only other thing is eating them is the sea star. And then this would go down because the kelps are being consumed by those sea urchins. Biodiversity is also important when we look at invasive species. Invasive species are pretty cool. They're all over the place. We'll just focus on one here. But these are species that are not native to a community. Usually they're brought in by humans and through human travels, sometimes intentionally, but most of the time unintentionally. Populations grow exponentially. They outcompete native organisms. They can lead to extinction of native organisms, which hurts biodiversity. So the Asian carp were brought in by catfish farmers to help clean out algae in their ponds because they eat a lot of different types of algae. So what happened is there was a big flood, and a bunch of these Asian carp got out, and they swam off into the tributaries and streams that connect to the Illinois River. And now in the United States, if you go down the Illinois River, you see these Asian carp just flying all over the place because when boat motors come by, it scares them and they jump up into your boats. They're huge. The fishing industry is falling apart because they're outcompeting all the native fish, and all anybody catches are carp down in the Illinois River. The fear is that the Asian carp are headed towards the Great Lakes. They're moving north towards cooler waters, and we're spending a lot of money in the United States government to try to keep the Asian carp out of the Great Lakes because that will also hurt the fishing industry there. Finally, when talking about biodiversity, we can't really discuss that without talking about extinction, which kind of ties into our invasive species. That's one way extinction occurs. But biodiversity can disappear we can become less diverse because of the things we do on the planet. Humans are a large cause of extinction. It's important to note that humans are going to lead to a 1,000 time increase in the normal rate of extinction. So there is a normal rate. We call this the background rate. So I just refer to that as the normal rate of extinction. About 1 species per million years. That's our background rate. Current levels are 1,000 times the background rate. Recently, we've seen the extinction of the northern white rhino. That happened in your lifetime. And that's a pretty sad thing to see, these large mammal species start to disappear. And they do disappear at a faster rate. Endangered species numbers are very low and likely to go extinct. So remember that things like habitat loss is a big one, pollution, overhunting. The polar bear would be an example of habitat being threatened.